Thank you very much. Well, on the matter of inflation, the Treasurer has said two things in recent times about inflation. The first thing that the Treasurer has said is that it is someone else's fault, that these are global factors. And as Senator Smith said in his contribution, this is now an Australian problem. It's an Australian problem because we know that the government is putting more money into the economy, which is adding to demand than it should be. We also know that compared to other jurisdictions which we generally compare ourselves to, that we are much higher when it comes to inflation than our peers abroad. Now, Steve Hamilton, who's a good economist, said back in June in the Financial Review that the idea that after more than a year of government and amid the Reserve Bank's efforts, which include raising rates by another 0.25% on Tuesday, back in June, quote, the government's claims this is all someone else's fault are increasingly untenable. Now, if they were untenable in June, they're absolutely ridiculous now in November. And so yesterday, Mr Chalmers said in his statements in the press that the government was helping the RBA, which I think is a very interesting turn of phrase, because, of course, if he was helping the RBA, then he would be running a contractionary fiscal stance. Now, there's three options here the government has. They could be running an expansionary stance, they could be running a neutral stance, or they could be running a contractionary stance. Now, the position that the RBA would prefer, given that it's raising rates and smashing mortgage holders, is to have the government run its fiscal policy in line with the monetary policy, therefore run it as a contractionary position. Now, when Michelle Bullock, the new governor, was at estimates last week, I was able to ask the new governor, what is the government's position here? What is fiscal policy in Australia doing? Is it expansionary? Is it neutral? Or is it contractionary? And Ms Bullock said that it is neutral. So the government is running a neutral position when it needs to be crimping the budget. It needs to be running a contractionary fiscal stance. Now, we know from table 3.2 in the budget, which outlines the new spending decisions taken, that in this current financial year, Chalmers is spending $14 billion in new decisions taken.
Senator, I just remind you to refer to the people in the other place by their correct.
Mr Chalmers is spending, thank you very much for that, spending $14 billion in this year, and a cumulative total in new decisions taken in the most recent budget of $42 billion. New decisions taken. So the government is running a expansionary fiscal, or at least a neutral, perhaps expansionary fiscal position, because the budget papers tell us that, and the Reserve Bank has underlined that with their statements to the Senate last week. Now, why is this the case? Why is this the case? I believe this is the case because no matter how well-intentioned the government may be, the government is unable to say no to its favourite vested interests. It's unable to turn the spending tap off, and it's been unable to stop delivering policy only for the rent-seekers and the bloodsuckers that run the Labor Party's pre-selections, man their polling places and their fellow travellers. So the policy support that the vested interests of the unions and super funds get is backed up by the federal and the Commonwealth budget here, because the Commonwealth budget is engineered to support the vested interests, and unfortunately the people that are paying the price for Labor's inability to say no are the mortgage holders. And around 1/3 of Australians have got a mortgage, and these people are paying the price because we are not headed in the right direction here. And it's all about the trajectory. If the budget position was contractionary, then you can imagine that the Reserve Bank is going to be able to stop what it's doing. But I believe that the Reserve Bank is going to be forced to continue, sadly, to increase rates because the Commonwealth government is sticking more and more money into the economy because it can't say no to the unions and all the other bloodsuckers and rent-seekers that are part of the modern Australian Labor Party's movement. So the reality is I think we are stuck with this position of having stubbornly high inflation while our competitors around the world are able to manage inflation. I think we are stuck into the lane of having persistently high inflation, which is going to hurt all mortgage holders in Australia.